All right, we are now live on YouTube Live. So if anyone wants to see a recording of this after the event, you can go to YouTube and type in CCP Student Development to find all of our previous panels and events that we've recorded since the pandemic started. And anyone watching who didn't know that, check out our other videos. So we are here today to celebrate the intersection of LGBTQ plus History Month and Latine Heritage Month. And we have an amazing panel, which is going to be moderated by one of our student leaders, Valentina. And I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm Vinny. I'm the coordinator of the Mark David LGBTQ Center, but I'm going to turn it over to Valentina to, did you get the? Okay. Oh, sorry. Now that Valentina has the panel questions on her computer, which all right, so Valentina, I'm going to give you your own dedicated mic so the panelists can share the other ones, and then I will get out of the way and let y'all talk.
Okay. So I just introduced myself. Hi, my name is Valentina Rosario. My pronouns are she and ella. I am a student here at Community College of Philadelphia. I am happy to be here with some of the most amazing people that I know. I know most of you. Oh, I'm sorry. With amazing people that I know, because I know most of the panelists. Fran Cortes and Elicia Gonzales. I forgot.
Greg Seany-Ariano.
There you go. And Didi.
Diamond or DDA.
Okay, and Diamond. So I'm gonna let each and every one of you actually introduce yourself, give your name, your pronouns, who you are, what do you do?
Just make sure to lean into
any order.
Yeah, just make sure you're leaning to the.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? This is good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francisco Cortes. I use he, him, él pronouns. I'm currently the co-executive director of Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, also known as Familia TQLM. We are a national LGBTQ immigrant rights organization working at the local, national, and recently international level, providing advocacy and education as well as services to LGBTQ immigrants, specifically throughout the Caribbean, South America, and Mexico. Previously, I was the executive director of GALE, local organization here in here in Philadelphia, not Familia. That's where I work. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elicia Gonzales. I use she, her pronouns. I am honestly really slightly baffled to be here just because I also was a former executive director at GALE, which is how I knew these two, but I knew them when they were babies. So to be on a panel both makes me feel proud and old, but it means that we must have done some good work in order for folks to feel still connected to the work. So I would say in my life right now, I'm a little bit of a free bird. I'm adjuncting at UPenn, teaching a course on LGBT life, and honestly just critiquing some of the theories that aren't really based on anything. So that's always fun. And then just sort of a local community rebel-rouser, I would say. Folks might know me as that too. Yeah, so happy to be here.
We're getting a little feedback from the mic, so if you two could share the one mic and you two share the other mic, that would be probably the best way to.
Greg Seany-Ariano, pronouns he, they. I'm a manager at the Division of HIV Health for the City of Philadelphia. I guess I'll make a quick plug. If you are living with HIV or if you are interested in prevention services like testing, you can call 215-985-2437.
Hello, my name is Diamond, or as a lot of people know me, DDA. That's my stage name. I am a current program coordinator for GALE here in Philly, And a little bit about me. I'm also the current reigning Philadelphia Leather 2020. Also won Statuella 3000 season 2. And just an all-around artistic badass.
So, can y'all hear me? I don't know. I do horrible with my
Just try, the further you are, the more echoey it sounds. So if you just lean in.
right here. Does that sound good, y'all? Yeah, I'm bad with mics. Y'all should have saw me when I snatched the mic. I could speak loud. Panel, let's get into the question. So the first question is, what does your identity as an LGBTQ Latinx person mean to you? And how does your queer and Latinx identities intersect?
Why you look?
I
I can make a couple brief remarks. So, I mean, I think being here today is a great example. We're right in the middle of LGBTQ History Month, as well as Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month. And so for me, that's what my identity comes full circle, because it's some of these spaces that we rarely get to be our full authentic self. And I've done a lot of interviews, a lot of panels, and people ask me, like, what is it that motivated you, inspired you to get involved? And to be honest, it was finding a place called Galay. I was an undergrad at Temple University, kid from the suburbs, like didn't even have a like gay straight alliance, what we used to call it back in my heyday. We didn't even have that in my school. I always grappled with figuring out what space that could be my queer self, what space that could be my Latinx immigrant Mexican self. And it wasn't until I was looking for an internship, and to be honest, I just thought I was going to go get people coffee and scan things because I was going to grad school and we were going to call it a day. But I found out that there was a space called Galay, and at the time it was a Latinx LGBTQ organization. And it was in this space when I walked into the door, saw people that looked like me, that talked like me, that were just as crazy as I was, that I realized, like, this is a space where my full identity, especially as a queer person, as an immigrant, as a Latinx person, I feel myself. And so that was now, I'm not going to age myself, but we're going to say a little more than 10 years ago. And since then, I've just worked hard to create that space for people throughout the country, and the space I have now and the capacity. And so for me, that's what being full and in my identity is. It's not only this month, but in spaces that can be created here in Philly and throughout the country for other LGBTQ, Latinx, and immigrant youth.
And I have a little bit of a similar story, even though we're of different generations, if you will. But I'm from Colorado, from Broomfield, which is exactly how it sounds. And so growing up, I just assumed that I might not be queer or gay because none of the gay women that I knew reflected me in any sort of way. And no disrespect to anybody who grew up in Colorado and whose identity this might represent, but it wasn't me. So it was like folks who were wearing like sports bras and had really bad hair and drove pickup trucks and had Frisbees with their dogs. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm not gay because that's not me. And then I moved to New York City and I went to some of the clubs where there were like Black and brown folks there. And I'm like, oh my God, wait, yeah, no, like I'm fully queer. And then I moved to Philly for school. And I also went to Outfest, which is coming up. So shout out Outfest, our fest now, which I'm guessing they'll talk about.
Yes.
And I remember coming up across this table, and it was, again, all these like mostly younger, very out loud queer folks, just really excited about giving me all of the merchandise. And they had this really cute little booklet. And for the first time, I saw myself reflected in this organization where I didn't have to like strip myself as a woman or as a queer person or as a Latina. I'm old school, so I still use Latina, not Latinx or Latine. That's my identity. But I was so drawn to the work of Galay, and so much so that I ended up, diving in somewhat reluctantly into the role of the executive director, which I was there for about 6 years or so. And for me, I think, both my queerness and also being Latina is a space of both like living at these intersections, but then also living incredibly outside of any sort of true definition, right? Which is why I've always just been drawn to the queer identity, because it doesn't really allow you to get to know me unless I give you permission to do so. So it's very much like living on the outside, right? Like of what society expects, of societal conditions, of expectations. But also that means that on the outside, and then I will talk more about this later, but on the outside can also be a little bit of like a lonely quest, right? Of finding your people, because sometimes you can be so othered and so much in the in-between space that it could lead to feeling like not enough of any one thing. So I grapple with that still. So yeah, but thanks.
So I think for me, a lot has to do with context and where I am at any given moment, to kind of segue from what you were saying. And so I grew up in a redneck small town. And so it was, you did not, when my mom would pick us up from kindergarten, we're like, don't speak to us in Spanish, because the headquarters for the KKK was just 45 miles away, you know. And so I felt like, you know, through my life, a little bit of the victim of cultural imperialism of some sort, of where some of my Latine identity was stripped, and feeling a sense of other, you know, what you're talking about, of being outside. And I ended up, my undergrad was anthropology, minor in women's studies, because of dealing with these issues of feeling like other. And then in college, when then I had to just confront my sexuality, so then became an activist and was focusing really on that part of my identity, but also race issues, because you cannot, you know, you bring your, that's part of, I think, my Latino, Latine, I use all of the above, because there is, I believe, within, I think, the queer community, a bit more racism than in the Latino community, you know. And so I think, where am I going with this? I guess, so some of the areas that where these LGBTQ and Latine identities connect are positive. Some of them are not necessarily positive. So, for instance, classism, I think, is heavy in each. But in the positive sense, though, I think my mother being from Barranquilla, coastal area of Colombia, it's the costeño culture, which is a love of dancing, love of, you know, love of music, rhythms, and friendly, outgoing. And then that also ties in with my Southern roots as well, because of that whole, you know, Southern openness. I'll leave it at that for now.
So the question was, what does what was it again?
So it's, what does your identity as an LGBTQ plus, and I'm going to expand on this, right? Latina or XE, because I use them interchangeably as well. Person mean to you, and how does your queer and, again, Latina, XE, O identities intersect?
So it means a lot to me, just because growing up, there was a lot of like opposition in my household, and in the area that I grew up in. I grew up in Lancaster County. Lancaster County, if you don't know, is about an hour away, and it is very conservative in way of thinking, but liberal-minded in the way that the city grows. So it was very confusing, because at one point, at one stance, like, it was like everything was growing in the liberal sense, but people's mindsets were very conservative. And even in my household, my mom was from Guanadia, Puerto Rico, and she grew up there and in the Catholic Church and stuff like that. So a lot of the ideologies from the Catholic Church were brought up in the household and stuff like that. And when I came out as gay at first, before I came out as a trans woman, there was a lot of opposition in the household with that type of stuff. So it was really difficult for me to navigate my identity throughout my childhood. And it wasn't until I went to high school and was able to find the support from my fellow classmates and stuff like that, where I started to really embrace my identity in its full self. One of the really cool things is, even though Lancaster County is like very conservative in mindset, there is a large Latinx population in Lancaster County. So I was surrounded by a whole bunch of that, my culture. And I was so excited because like, that's something that I felt like in my household, I didn't necessarily get to experience, because like, I felt like I was ousted out as soon as I came out as gay, and then trans. And my friends and my close friends, and I call them family now, they were very embracing. They took me to like all the Puerto Rican Day parades that were happening in New York and in the state of PA close by. And it was really a great opportunity for me to embrace my culture and feel like I was included without feeling like I was being ousted, because for a very long time I felt like I was being ousted. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. So kind of answered, your folks kind of answered some of these questions that we already have here. So I'm gonna jump into, what are some unique challenges or barriers you face as a queer Latina or ex-e person?
I'll start with that one. So one of the things that I definitely experience a lot is colorism. I am of darker hue. I'm Afro-Boricua. I'm Black Puerto Rican. And oftentimes when I go out with family members and stuff like that, they make fun of my skin color, or they other me because of my skin color. So there is a lot of hurt that comes from those conversations, because I do feel like at times there is a colorism issue that occurs in our community that we do not want to discuss or talk about. And it's something that should be brought to the forefront, because colorism is basically an agent of white supremacy, which we all suffer from. So I say that to say that, like, well, that is one of the biggest issues that I definitely do kind of like face when I'm interacting with my community members, because when they see me, all they see is like my skin color, and they say, "Oh, you're Black." But then I go into my detail of my history and my background, and then it's like, okay, well, then the stereotypes come in and all that good stuff, and it gets frustrating. It really does.
I can go. So I'm going to try not to ramble, but there is an invisibilization, I think, that occurs with my identities, where folks see me as a white woman, and folks often will read me as straight. And so in both Latino communities and then also in other communities, I feel like I somehow, like, I don't necessarily come through, right? Like my authentic self doesn't necessarily come through. And it's this really rough place of like this internalized invisibilization that I try to fight against constantly. And I remember, for example, this one clear example comes out. We were preparing for National Latino HIV/AIDS Day, which this one was responsible for making us allowing us to do. And this woman who I had worked with for a long time, I think she might have been Puerto Puerto Rican, and I can't remember, but she was like real. She introduced herself with all 7 of her names.
Shout out.
Bring her into the space.
Yeah.
And I remember we were going around and I've worked with her for at least 3 years at this point, right? And so we were going around, and for some reason we said our last name, not just our first name. So I was like, Elicia Gonzales, and she's like, "Mira, you're Latina. Oh, come here!" And all of a sudden, I was legitimate in her eyes, And so I feel like there's been this rub of not really fully being embraced within the Latino community. And it stems all the way back to when I was young, right? When I was like up into 5th grade, I was really raised in an all-white school. And then when I went to a school that was almost the inverse, it was almost all Latino, the Latino kids would be like, "Oh, you're whitewashed," right? Then when I went back to the school where there was mostly white people, the white kids would be like, "Oh, you're a beaner." Like in Colorado, that's what they call people. And then when I came out to Philly, they're like, "Oh, you're Spanish. Oh, you're Puerto Rican." And I'm like, "No." So there's this constant, like, people not getting me, and then me getting to a place finally now, like I'm a grown-ass woman finally, where I'm like, it's not for me to try to prove to you like who I am, right? Like I will let you in, like I'm a Scorpio, so I don't let everybody in. But if you get a chance to get in, then you get me, right? And if you don't, like that's on you, So, but I would say like that's one of the grapples that thank God for therapy, thank God for other people who look like me, who I can like bounce these ideas off of, and who there's something really powerful about like it might be trauma bonding, Valentina, but something about being like, oh, that's not just me. Like you also feel not enough, like not enough Latino or not enough queer or whatever, that has gotten me through. So yeah, community and friendship and family is life-saving.
Did y'all want me to repeat the question, or do you remember the question? Okay. The question was, what are some unique challenges or barriers you face as a queer Latina or XE person?
So to piggyback on that, my Spanish is only okay. It's not great. And so when I'm in, the Latina environments, I feel like another sometimes because I'm following some, but then I have to ask some, and then but when I'm in, a queer environment that's all white, then I'm not feeling part of that community either. I feel like what's going on, and so there's that kind of still perpetuation of the other, but on the fun side, there are places like Galay that is on the forefront of creating programming, in Philly, but also how I became more connected myself was through soccer. We have a queer soccer club, Philadelphia Falcons, and so we have you can speak Spanish and be in the club, and that's no issue because many people are also speaking Spanish, and through that have made some really close friendships. But also there's some campgrounds. There's Oneida, which has this huge Miss Columbia pageant with thousands of Latinas going out to the woods and partying every year. And so those are, some of the connections. And now through another friend, there's this Vaquero circuit party. So like basically gay Mexican circuit parties happening around the U.S., which is a lot of fun. So I've met some of their friends, my friends' friends. And now as time progresses, there's just becoming more Latino spaces in these traditionally white queer spaces now. And so I can go to some of these like the campgrounds, and then I see, mi gente, and so that's great. So things are changing. Anything else on that? But there are differences in the spaces. I feel like the Latinx community is more intergenerational. than the queer community. So, and as I age, that's a good thing that I feel this comfort, intergenerational comfort, in the Latino community.
I'm not going to speak too much about adversities because I have had the privilege to, since being in the workforce, be in spaces that are both Latinx, immigrant, and LGBTQ, or like my mom likes to say, te gusta perseguir la jotería. You like to follow all the gays, the queers. So that's what I've done. And so I'm in this space. But I think one thing I want to just touch base on in this topic is just about acknowledging the diversity when we talk about LGBTQ and I'm just going to use Latinx identities. You see how rich and abundant our queer and trans community is just when we talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. And then there's another layer of Latinidad that is also has so robust, even something like language. Not everyone speaks Spanish. There's Brazilians that are Latinx, LGBTQ that are speaking Portuguese. There's Haitians that are speaking. So there's just even on language, ethnicity, we come in all shades and colors as well. And so I like to say these conversations are important because we get to see this rich abundance of our culture because we do come in so many facets and we're complex and we're complicated at times as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that. And that does cause a lot of internal adversity, questioning your worthiness. I've gone through it too. I'm sure we all have. But creating spaces like this and organizations like LA and others across the country and the world to be able to be yourself is so important because we are just one piece of that giant puzzle of LGBTQ Latinidad.
Ew. So I'm actually going to answer this question because this question hit home for me. And I'm going to just repeat it. So, because my experiences are different from your experiences, right? As a trans, like a binary trans, Boricua, right? Afro-Boricua person. So the question again was, I don't know what's going on with this feedback, was what are some of the unique challenges and barriers you face as a queer, I'm going to say Latina person, right? Myself. So I think the biggest boundary I face is there's no space for me. As a queer Latina, I have been stripped of everything. I came up in an age where the clubs stopped doing Latino nights. The queer clubs don't do Latino nights no more, right? I don't have community there. I'm growing up in an age where like everybody is entitled to their own identity, to their own experience, and to who they are. And as a Latina person, I hold so much of my Latinidad and my culture and what was taught to me, what my grandmother taught my mother, what my mother taught me, my womanhood. And that womanhood to me is precious and valuable. So in the trans community, I'm made to feel less than trans. Like I'm not trans enough. So the space is hard, right? Like there's nowhere for a Latino person who feels that same. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of trans Latinas in my neighborhood where I have conversations and we're like, there's nowhere for us. Like that is stripped from us. There's not a space we can go into, talk about culture and talk about food and talk about identities and experiences. I grew up a little bit more context. I grew up in Kensington, and right here in Philadelphia. I grew up in Kensington. I grew up in an extremely Puerto Rican neighborhood. My neighbors are my tias and tios. They were able to discipline me. They were able to tell me, don't do that. I grew up with music blasting on a Saturday morning. I grew up with, if my mom didn't have it and my neighbor was cooking, my neighbor would cook my family a meal. I grew up like that. I can't share that with everybody because not everybody grew up like that. Not everybody understands that. So when I talk about womanhood and I talk about transness, I don't have space for that. And then when I go into spaces where I'm trying to talk about the struggles as a Latino person, because there are a lot of struggles. And be clear about Kensington again. It's a Latino neighborhood that has been completely forgotten, that nobody takes care of, right? And the only time anybody talks about Kensington is the drugs. So I feel like the barriers the barriers and challenges that we face are erasure. The barriers and challenges that we face is that nobody want to have conversations about how important culture is, that everything in queer spaces, that culture plays a big part in who we are as queer and trans people. Like that brings, again, like you said, language. That brings that struggle between am I enough, am I not enough? Like those struggles are real and personal. But yeah, so yeah, that's it. I'm sorry. I know that was heavy, but okay, I'm delusional and jamming, or maybe it's trauma bonding. That is my book name, by the way. No, let me stop. Or maybe it's trauma bonding. So the next question is oh, what are the things about your identity and culture that brings you joy or affirmation?
God, a happy question.
Actually,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to. I was thinking we were still on that other one, but so with the challenges, I want to add to that about spaces and there not being spaces, and I want to point out that Philadelphia remains the poorest large city in the U.S. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. But also, what we need to keep in mind is that relative to members of other racial and ethnic groups, Hispanic Philadelphian residents have the highest poverty rate, more than triple the rate of non-Hispanic white residents. Okay, so for Hispanics, the poverty rate in a few years ago, which was 40.2%. For Black poverty rate, 26.7, Asian 23.1, and for non-white Hispanic 12.7. So this impacts me. This impacts all of us. Okay, because this, when you don't have the capital to create the spaces, okay, when you don't have those attending who can afford to pay the prices, the drink prices, okay, when you don't have the investors who don't want to invest because the people who show up look like they're from the barrio, okay, this has a huge impact as a queer Latino because of that. So,
Yeah. I'm gonna add on, by the way, the poorest neighborhood in Philadelphia, which is Fair Hill, medium income, 92% Latino, by the way. Medium income is like $15,000, like in that neighborhood. Just so y'all could know, like we struggling out here, and nobody talking about it, but we are. So happy question again. Happy question again. What are the things about your identity and culture that brings you joy and affirmations?
So I'm a big foodie. I love food. So anytime there's a conversation about food or there is an opportunity to fellowship over a meal, I'm down with it. When I went to visit my family back on the island in Puerto Rico, the one thing that like brought me joy the entire trip was just being able to get home cooked meals from my family and just being able to sit in fellowship and talk about things that were going on in our culture and the island and what things they were needing and struggling with, and also what brought us joy, what we were looking forward to. So food is something that really is a big impact in our culture. I think food is, with any culture, is very important because it brings, like, there's so much rich history in how we make our food and stuff like that. So food is one of my biggest things. Also the music. I forgot that. I'm currently working on a Spanish album right now. So it's a lot of work. My mom is helping me with it. But I think music is a universal love language to anybody's culture. And when we are able to celebrate the music and be able to let our bodies be free in the moment where we're listening to music and stuff like that, I think that's when we are able to like really appreciate our cultures and appreciate the history that we've been through and whatnot. So music and food are my top two things that bring me joy.
100%. Yeah, cosign on the music. I remember being younger and it wasn't a party until like most of the people left. And then we moved the table and just like busted out and dancing, and just got to be 100% silly. So I love, the dancing aspect, which I'm sure Greg will touch on because Greg also is about dancing everywhere he can go. And then just being really loud. I moved into a neighborhood now where everybody's loud and the music is blaring and people are like yelling across the street, like, "What you cooking?" And at first it was a little bit of like an adjustment because I also came from like a Fishtown neighborhood where everybody's like, good morning, which I also, I guess, liked. But there's something about just being able to be really out loud that I appreciate that feels really connected to who I am inside. And I think for me, like where it all boils down is that when you're in community, and I mean also in spaces that are like professional, like when I'm in a professional space in which we get to see each other as people and you're checking in with each other, how are you feeling? How's your family? Like, are you okay? Versus this is a meeting agenda and let's get to it. And point 1, point 2, point 3, like that really rigid way of showing up. Like we get to just completely dismiss that, right? And just like shed it when we get to show up authentically in our queerness and our Latinidad. And so for me, I think it's about being able to strip out of your mask and just really be in your body, right? Like really connecting to who we are, like at our essence and at our core, without the like, what is your job title, or even like, what is your role to somebody else, right? Like I'm a mom, I'm this, I'm not a mom. Well, I'm a dog and cat mom, but like who are you to your core, and then being able to bring that out through a shared meal, through music, through dancing. So that's some joy.
Here for everybody.
Echo all that. We love food. We love to dance. I think for me in this moment, and I'm reflecting off a trip from this weekend, what really brings me joy is honestly just seeing the resilience and just pure beauty of our community. Just for a little context, in early February, as an organization, we decided to launch a campaign called Familia en el Sur. So this was in the midst of all the anti-trans legislation happening in the Deep South. And as a national org, it was our calling to come into Southern states and to organize with folks, because too many times we forget that queer folks, that Latinx folks, that immigrants live in the South. And so we launched this initiative, Familia en el Sur, to hit 8 Southern states, in North Carolina, going to Mississippi, Alabama. Yes, y'all, we were in Alabama. Texas, Georgia. We just got back from Tennessee and we're closing it off next month, in Florida. And so I just got back from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Today, I could not tell you on a map where that damn city is, but we were called in by folks to help them start the first LGBTQ Latinx Pride event. And so that's what's part of the privilege we have being a national organization, is be able to support some of these local organizations. And so we went down to Chattanooga, Tennessee this past weekend, helped them do a wonderful intergenerational working class Spanish speaking event for LGBTQ Latinx folks. And just if y'all been following Tennessee and just any Southern states, like the constant attack, the anti-trans, anti-immigrant legislation that's not only introduced, but has been passed in Tennessee. It's been passed. Anti-drag, anti-performance of LGBTQ folks. It's just, it weighs heavy on us being here in Philadelphia, being in the Northeast. But like, imagine the toll it takes of the folks that are actually living that, to the drag queens that we hire for the event to come and perform, and despite the fear. And so for me, seeing the resilience and the pure joy that like, we're here, we're queer, and we ain't going nowhere, is what really brings me joy right now, is just seeing that our community is resilient and we're going to get through whatever adversity we're facing right now, as we have in the past.
Okay. Any joy affirmation?
Well, don't let me show them a video of you dancing last week.
Okay.
We got to
So yeah, music is a big thing for me, and that's I go to some places, some queer places, and I'm waiting to dance some because I really love the Latin rhythms, and and food as well, but the music and the dancing really and also the sense of community. Like I can go to a place and then when I find I'm just going to use that term. I feel connected. I feel I can do whatever, and I feel more relaxed.
I forgot one thing. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. There's also an unapologetic, sexy that we get to be, which would also be it can be used against us, right? Like it could be fetishized as oh, Latinos are so spicy. Yes, the fuck we are. Yeah. And also you don't get to say that about us, right? Like we are more than just our spice. But there is an undeniable, unapologetic sex appeal and embodiment of sexuality, if you will, that I think is different in the queer Latino community than it is in other communities, be it, mostly other ethnicities, I would say. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring in the sex part.
You call it vulgar. We call it just living in our body.
And sex and fashion.
Yes.
Yes. Sexy fashion, always, right? Yeah. I don't know about y'all, but my parents had really nasty talks in front of me when I was a child.
I'm so surprised.
No? For real? Are you serious? Oh, are you? No. Yeah, I used to hear all kind of crazy stuff. Even our sayings in Spanish are really nasty. Like if my mom didn't have enough money in English, she'd be like, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to pay for it with the hairs on my coochie?" Basically, is what she would say. Yeah, crazy. We have crazy things we'd say. Your mom's never said that. Hold on, your mom has never said that.
I know your mom.
Con qué? Los pendejitos. Oh wow, y'all crazy. Yeah. That's funny. So people often mention religion, gender roles, gendered language, and machismas to suggest that the LatineXQueer communities are more homophobic or transphobic than other cultures. What would you say to the people who make this argument? How does this compare to your actual lived experience dealing with homophobia and transphobia in your communities?
That side needs a mic.
Yeah.
See, this is so complicated because I grew up in a household that used Catholic religion to kind of suppress that energy, but at the same time I also have to remember that that is an agent of white supremacy. So it's not, I can't say that we are more our communities are more homophobic or transphobic or stuff like that, because it's not fair to put that label on us. I experienced it on my Black side, with the church too. So is that to say that they're also in the same boat as our Latinx counterparts? No, I don't think that it's fair to put that statement on top of us. What we really should be digesting and really deconstructing is how did our communities get to a point where we allowed this white supremacist kind of ideology to allow us to affect our community members that may be queer or trans. How do we deconstruct that ideology, and how do we start to really have conversations in that space? So that's where I would want to start when it comes to those things.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that point, DDA, because while I was at Galay, we did a campaign called Positivo, and the idea was that we were really going to showcase that Latinos are living with HIV, and this is how they're doing so, and still, living a full life, etc. So we set out to survey Latinos in Philadelphia. We surveyed just a little over 100 people in North Philly. Some were, primarily Spanish speaking or what have you, but all Latino identified. And what we found out was that, in fact, Latinos were actually far more affirming of people both who were gay and trans, and also who were living with HIV. And so, like, overwhelmingly so, like 80% were in favor of people who, were gay or living with HIV. And so that it really reframed the campaign and allowed us to really say, like, Latinos are just as affirming. The part that's not known is that Latinos aren't talking to one another about how they're actually affirming of, like, their sons, their daughters, their nephews, etc. And so it's that the secrecy that needs to get lifted, but it's not like Latinos are inherently more homophobic. And so what we also started to say, I actually got this from somebody, and I can't remember who, and I'm sorry that I don't remember the origin story here, but this researcher was saying Latinos are more homophobic, it's actually racist, right? It's like rooted in racism. So we were happy to put out that really beautiful campaign, of which you were part of it, yeah?
I was.
Yeah. So you can just Google.
My twin brother.
Yeah.
was a part of that.
Former, but you could just Google Positivo Philadelphia, and you'll see some of the imagery and the captions that we were able to put up.
White people literally invented conversion therapy, and they have the audacity to go.
I'm saying.
I had to write that question 3 times to make it not a leading question.
Right. Tell us why this is not true.
I'm good. I don't need to give that question any like.
Okay.
So to piggyback on what both Didier and Elicia are saying, that Catholicism is heavy, and it does have a big impact. And I think framing the question too, the machismo part, it gives a little bit more power to men, because in the Latino community, women are very powerful and have command a lot of authority. And so I think really what one factor influence is, I think Latino communities tend to be I guess there's a strong family interdependence. And so, and then one's actions can then have impacts on others. So I think then there is this a little bit of conservatism and in one's outward appearance, gender expression or sexual expression. And so, but it's just that it's I would argue though that behind that silence, exactly what you said, there's perhaps really more sexual diversity and expression and stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm gonna just add on like 1 minute for that, because my experience, especially like as no offense as a younger person, no, my experience out here as a Boricua was as when I came out as gay, it was a lot harder for me. I came out as trans, a lot more acceptance, especially like the more feminine I got, the more into like I said, I'm a very binary trans person. The more into my womanhood, where people like match, like, oh, you're into men. This is how you look. This is how you act. Like it was a lot easier. Like that was outside, but my family was definitely like, okay, like we support you. So yeah, I don't think that saying that we are more transphobic or homophobic is fair. Again, it's a cultural thing, and then and I don't feel bad when I tell this people, if you're not in the in club, you're just not in the in club and you don't get it. And that's on you. That is it. And then any questions from the audience?
I am curious. Well, first of all, thank you. This is so delightful. Thank you, Vinny, for planning it and everyone. I'm very curious because I think I heard something, which is that there's a pattern of most of you having lived or grown up in what I'll call non-traditional Latinx environments. In other words, you're not New Yorican, you're not, Philarican, you're like somewhere in the South, somewhere in Colorado, somewhere in, and how does that influence you or change your worldview or your personal view when you came from, for example, from Colorado to New York, right? Or from the South to, I don't know, wherever, Philly or wherever. How did that change? Because I can see that if you're growing up in an area where there aren't very many Latinx, then your queerness could be considered something a little bit different. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I can speak briefly. So I was born in Mexico. I was born in Guanajuato, Mexico. I moved to the United States when I was 5 to agricultural worker parents in a small town outside of Philly called Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. If y'all don't know, we're the mushroom capital of the world.
Yeah.
And that's what caused the migration. Yeah. Halfway between here and Lancaster. So I guess I bring, yes. And I moved to the U.S. when I was 5. So I remember, growing up in Mexico partially and then moving here. But I did grow up in a all Mexican household. To date, my parents' English is very bare minimum. We grew up like only speaking Spanish, only eating Mexican food, only watching like telenovelas. My dad still watches them today, which is interesting. My dad is the one that's really into the drama, not my mom. But yeah, I mean, it is, but like I went to a predominantly like suburban kind of like white school. And so I think that's why it's like navigating these spaces. We talk about this, like whether consciously or subconsciously, just code switching and knowing like where to be my Latinidad, where to be my queerness, where to be my Mexican immigrantness, my whatever it may be. And so I don't know if that touches on the question, but like that's just my experience and how I grew up with it. Colorado.
I know. I'm trying to represent. The only thing that I wanted to add to that is just there was a lot of, I think, inadvertent or not inadvertent. What's the word I'm thinking of? Implicit assimilation that had to happen, right? And so I think like as I grew up, there was like a whitewashing that happened and that I embraced, right? And that I took on because of the way that I was received by other people or the way that I was, put on this path of, like getting good grades and what have you. Like we grew up in a Chicano household, right? Like I had all like this like Mexican, art and whatever around our house. And then as we got older, things got whiter. And so it's something that I grapple with still, right? Like really trying to get connected to my roots and really trying to understand like where I come from and also like getting rid of the shame that comes with that, right? Like this isn't something that I necessarily chose to do, right? But that was like forced upon me because of white supremacy and what have you, right? And I just like ate it. Like I ate all of that shame and all of that assimilation. And then to be able to just really shed that and really like not to be hokey, but like come out and be your full self. Is a journey, right? A lifelong journey. So, yeah. Thank you for that question.
Anybody else? Yeah. Last thoughts? Any last question?
It is a lifelong journey.
Oh, isn't it?
Thank
Now-
you all very much.
Yes.
Assimilation is some white people shit. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So thank you everyone for being here today. And thank you for those of you watching online. Like I said, the recording of this will be on our YouTube page, CCP Student Development, if you want to go back and watch anything or share it with some friends who may have missed it. Our next event for LGBTQ History Month is happening in a half an hour across the street in the Library Learning Commons. We will be debuting a brand new exhibit put together by the librarians and faculty at CCP of CCP's queer history. So we have old newspapers and yearbooks and information about like what it was like to be an LGBTQ student over the years at CCP. So please join us in the library at 1:00. We will have refreshments if you want some snacks. So hopefully we'll see you all over there. And thank you again to Valentina, Francisco, Elicia, Greg, and Diamond for being here today. And have a great rest of your day.